Hi, welcome to another episode of MYD Global. I'm your host, Leanne Hackman-Carty. If you're a business, you need to think about what would happen if a disaster hits today, tomorrow, or even next week. That's business continuity. And a lot of businesses that I talk to don't have a business continuity plan in place, nor have they really thought of what they would do. With COVID, it's now an absolute essential thing to think about. In today's episode, I'm speaking with Chris Miller. She's a business continuity expert out of Australia. Her background is as diverse as I've heard in a long time. She's been a policeman, an emergency management person. She's been on the front lines with a lot of different disasters. She's now really doing a lot of work with businesses and understanding business continuity, COVID related. In particular, she talks about a COVID plus business continuity plan. So stay tuned as I talk to Chris about the importance of having a plan in place. Hi, Chris. How are you doing today?
Fine, thank you. And g'day from Australia.
Oh, yes. Good day from Canada.
Based in Canberra, Australia.
So before we get started with our episode, can you just tell the viewers a little bit about yourself?
Yes, thanks very much for this opportunity, Leanne, and welcome to your listeners. My background is in emergency management. I started as a police cadet, and even before that, I was involved in mountain rescue. I come from a family involved in that space. And as a police cadet, I found myself involved in the 1974 Brisbane floods, and it's been emergency management since then. Brisbane is my hometown. Canberra is where I currently reside. Canberra is the federal capital of Australia. It's like Ottawa for the Canadians, Washington DC for the Americans. Anyway, after many years in and out of emergency management, I found myself offered a 3-month trial to see if I could make the transition from emergency management to business continuity. And that was 15 years ago, last November.
Wow.
I found my way out, which is alarming because I used to teach police search and rescue.
So you've got a big perspective from many different angles.
Yes, I'm also a director for the ACT on the Australasian Institute of Emergency Services and much involved with the Business Continuity Institute, which offers lots of resources to your listeners if they need them in these COVID times.
That's great. And that's kind of what I want to talk to you today. You know, when people think business continuity, sometimes I think they only think of IT. They don't think of the big picture. So tell us your kind of definition of what business continuity is.
It's about the whole business. When I first came into the business continuity space, I was actually alarmed that the focus was only on the most time-critical business processes. And I was thinking, but you actually want to restore the whole business. So the sort of methodology I encourage my clients and colleagues to think about is what I call the inverted triangle, where the pointy end is those items that are less than 7-day recovery timelines, but that you progressively recover the total business. And of course, in a pandemic, the advantage of that approach is that you can shed those parts of the business and focus in on the things that you really must keep running. The things that generate most of the cash flow, the things there might be regulatory requirements or people who might sue you if you don't deliver it. Those kind of drivers help determine what's at the pointy end, as I call it. And it's a simple methodology, but it's one that seems to make sense to a lot of business owners.
So I just find, you know, for a lot of, especially small business owners, having a business plan is a struggle for most of them. And so then when you tell them, oh, you need a business continuity plan too, and most of them just look at you like, what are you talking about? I don't have time. Well, what would your advice be to the smaller business that's struggling to even just, you know, pay bills? But what kind of messaging would you think would be good for them?
Well, a lot of those small businesses are like me. I'm a sole trader and I've worked with businesses as small as 2, the Aboriginal Land Commissioner. So succession planning is one of the really important parts of the business is, you know, what if I got rubbed out? What if something happened to me? So I work with colleagues and we sort of have succession plans across each other so that if something happened to me, some of my other colleagues would step up to the plate and take over my contracts and vice versa. So it's that kind of low grade thing, and often it's just, it appears to be a simple checklist, and I'm a bit of a checklist fan in the business continuity space. I'm not one for the great big Bible sized books, no disrespect to Bibles, but you know what I mean. I'm much more a short, sharp, A4 list, maybe two double sided, but keep it really small and
Yeah.
focus on the most essential things in the first phase. The first 24 hours, I often get people to focus on. And within a couple of hours, I found I can sit down with most small businesses and come up with a reasonable checklist. A lot of times they have it in their head. It's just a
Yeah.
matter of documenting it. And one of the approaches I put is you want the most expert people to write it for the least expert people to do it. When I worked for News Corp, which is a rather larger business than you're probably pitching at here, I remember speaking to their chief engineer of their huge printing group at Chullora, which is a sort of western suburb of Sydney. And I said to him, when is it most likely that something will go wrong with this huge plant? And he said, 2:00 in the morning. And I said, are you here at 2:00 in the morning? And he said, that's why I got promoted, so I don't have to be here at 2:00 in the morning. I then said, are there things that an inexperienced colleague could do that might actually make things worse? And he said, oh, you better believe it, and started rattling off a list. So when we wrote his checklist, it was focused on not only what people needed to do, but what they shouldn't do.
Yeah.
And it was designed by him and his most expert team, who tended to work business hours, for the least expert people who might find themselves in a bit of a bother. I mean, think of Chernobyl. It happened early one morning too. And I'm sure they had similar problems. Lack of the experienced people to provide the advice that was in their head, but that needs to be documented in a business continuity plan or a simple checklist. I think sometimes people overthink business continuity plans. It's just often documenting what you already know in a way that someone else can pick it up and go, oh, okay, that's what they want me to do, until the cavalry arrives, as I sometimes.
So, how do you think this whole area of business continuity has changed with COVID? Has it changed how people need to approach their business continuity? What's your opinion?
It certainly has. But just coming back quickly before we move on to COVID, to your point about ITDR, is when I first came into this space with Y2K and the like, there was a lot of focus on DR, whereas we need to be recovering the whole business. I see DR, IT as a spine of the business. And often disaster recovery plans I've seen, because of the lack of good business continuity planning, the IT people are making heroic assumptions about what the business actually wants, what the priorities are for the business, rather than what the priorities are for IT. Now, moving on to COVID, I've been encouraging my clients and colleagues to look back as well as looking forward. So we've been planning for what business as usual look like, because in the haste to respond to COVID, many businesses left behind critical parts of their business. For instance, cybersecurity controls. In a couple of my clients, I'm certain that the only way they could make working remotely or working from home possible was to pull out a whole lot of cybersecurity controls that I knew they had in place, and that they previously told me restricted them to working in their workplace, their physical workplace. And magically, they're not there anymore. So look back, see if there's parts of the business or critical systems such as cybersecurity, because there's still been considerable cyber attack activity during COVID, and pulling those into what we're calling COVID normal, the time that we're currently in, where we can anticipate more outbreaks and more disruption, possibly for the next 2 to 5 years while the vaccines roll out. Because the harsh reality is, even though we're all very excited about Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca, and so the list goes on, the harsh reality is it's going to take a while for them to mass manufacture them. There are also some critical supply issues in terms of syringes and glass vials which may restrict their capacity to deliver those mass vaccinations that we know we all need. And then moving into the question of supply chain. So even if we can mass manufacture it, we can deal with these, as we would call them in business continuity speak, dependency issues like vials and syringes and so on. We then have to distribute it. Now, I don't know about air travel in Canada, but air travel in Australia has been greatly restricted during COVID. And historically, most of our supplies, such as pharma, goes in the belly of the plane. So you have the passengers on the top and what's called belly cargo in the base. And not all planes are configured to carry cold chain or ultra cold chain supplies for pharma. So that's another little problem. And also those big cargo freighters you may have seen that some airlines, and not all, offer, they're much in demand because we covered online shopping. So there's going to be real congestion and conflict between freight, between vaccines and other medical supplies, all sorts of priority things. We ship a lot of live lobsters out of Australia. They're very popular in the Asian markets. And they need immediate departure from the on airlines. You can't have your live lobster sitting on the tarmac for very long. So there's very real problems in terms of mass manufacture supply chain and then turning vaccines into vaccinations. And many employers are contemplating whether they will need that to be a requirement of their employees to return to a fixed workplace, both to protect other employees, but also to protect clients and visitors and others who might come to their fixed workplaces. And then in Australia, I don't know if this is the issue for North America, there's some big issues about privacy. There's some great concerns about vaccine hesitancy. The numbers in Australia are between 20 and 30% of people who've indicated they were not at ease at receiving their voluntary vaccines. And you may have similar data in Canada and the United States. It was as high as 50 to 60%, but I understand now the vaccines are rolling out, that's reducing. And as Dr. Fauci wisely points out, in time, the vaccine hesitant people will see that there's few adverse reactions and that there seems to be much benefit and they may feel more at ease. So if employers are contemplating, business owners are contemplating making COVID vaccines a requirement, mandatory to return to workplaces, maybe just back off a bit and let people feel at ease. The vaccine hesitancy people will gradually come into the fold. Of course, there'll always be a group of what we might call anti-vaxxers, and no matter what we say or do or explain or how good the science is or how few the adverse reactions are, they won't be convinced. And they probably aren't convinced for other vaccinations like measles, mumps, rubella, polio, and some of those other things, which is why we never achieve 100% herd immunity. So there's a whole lot of things there for business owners to consider, both in terms of their looking back, looking to settle into COVID normal, but also planning forward for plus 5 years. What will your business look like in 5 years' time? And even some of the winners in COVID times, such as couriers, the on-the-ground couriers in Australia have been very busy delivering our online shopping.
Yeah.
And your smile, I assume that's the experience of North Americans too.
Yeah.
But when you looked at Wuhan, when they had the shutdown, they moved to robot couriers. So they were using all sorts of artificial devices to deliver things so that they would have contactless courier deliveries. Now, what happens in 5 years' time if that becomes very popular? In Canberra, where I usually live, they've been trialling drone deliveries for Amazon, not humans. So even some of the businesses that seem to have been successful in the COVID normal times, the new normal, the next normal might be different for them too.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's very true. I think businesses, when you think of what we all did, all of our businesses prior to COVID, I think I would be shocked if any businesses could remain exactly the same, because it was just such a monumental shift for so many people. So before we wrap up, is there anything else that perhaps you want to mention that I didn't ask about?
Well, the most important thing at this point is to follow the public health advice. And a lot of that public health advice in Australia includes for businesses. So there are online resources, and I'm sure the Canadian and other governments have made these available, as has the Australian government and New Zealand government and so on. So if you look at your government health sites and look for the advice about business, there will be fact sheets and other resources on which you can rely. Keep monitoring those sites because there may be additional information that would be helpful to your business. The public health advice may change. In terms of individual things, just maintain the good public health measures such as washing your hands, wearing your mask, particularly if you're in a confined space like public transport. Also, things like being patient with people, because I think we really haven't seen the full effects of the tsunami. There will be mental health issues that are sort of brewing along the undercurrent, and there will be a lot of not just vaccine hesitancy, but hesitancy to return to the workplace. So be patient with people because a lot of people are quite frightened.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the most scary thing that's ever happened to them in their life. You know, I used to be a police officer and get shot at when I was in search and rescue, jump out of helicopters, so and off ropes and do all sorts of strange things. So perhaps my threshold for risk taking is greater than the other people. And if you think of it in a normal distribution, and you got me at the crazy end, but there'll be people who are at the hesitant end. So be patient with your staff. Be reassuring when you're trying to resume working in fixed workplaces. So, for instance, I was just reading Time where they were saying that 42% of Americans have been working remotely. Now, not all of them will continue to work remotely, but some of them may feel more at ease to have what we're calling in Australia 3-2. So you may have 3 days in the office, 2 days remotely, or vice versa. Just be flexible with people because it's been a terrible shock. We've lived in a secure world, and all of a sudden, COVID has pointed out that we no longer live in a secure world. We live in a scary place where, unfortunately, large numbers of people have died. I saw the ceremony in America for the now President Biden with the recognising the 400,000 deaths. I don't know what your death rate in Canada's like, but every death's a sad one. And having been a police officer and delivered death messages, I know what personal devastation it brings to families. So I don't underestimate the harm that's been done. And I'd encourage business owners to be empathetic, to be sympathetic, particularly in an environment where people have had a terrible shock and may have lost loved ones or had caring responsibilities, may have been ill themselves. And so resuming business as usual, that won't be happening. It'll be a business unusual and it will take time to settle down. So if everyone's patient, I think we'll get a good result.
Well, thank you, Christy. That's very wise, and obviously, you know from your experience on some of these issues for sure. So, thank you so much for spending time today and talking a little bit about your work and the importance of business continuity, both before COVID and after. So, take care. I will put your website on the video below in the description, and wishing you all the best.
Thank you so much, Leanne, and all the best to your listeners. Stay well.
Thank you.